Dr. William Taylor, Public Relations Director of Southern Missionary College, Collegedale, Tennessee.
It is a real pleasure to be here with you. And looking over this list of speakers and looking around the room at the people who are here, many of them whom I've known for years, I feel just a little bit like a novice among professionals, like an old workhorse nag among slick thoroughbred racehorses, or like some of the politicians compared to some other politicians today. Communications. Communication is what we're talking about, what we've been dealing with, what you've been dealing with here. And I'm listed here to talk on communications theory, and we think it's very simple, don't we? It's just a question of your speaking or writing and getting something across to somebody else. But you know, what we think is so simple becomes so complex in the study of it that it's hardly possible, if you stop to think about it, how we do as well as we do. Really, how we do as well as we do. Because really, as the world gets more complex, and as people's thinking gets more complex, as they turn each other off, as people don't listen anymore, it gets increasingly complex. Do you realize, and I'm basing many of my remarks, and I'll have a bibliography to go with this, but I'm basing many of my remarks on Berlow's The Process of Communication, which is a text we use in the class at SMC. I don't teach communications right now. I teach one class in public relations, and we're teaching another class in freshman English, freshman composition on the Madison Highland campus, and I teach that. So I'm engaged almost in half-time teaching on our campus, and therefore if you write me any letters, I don't answer them. If you call me on the telephone, I can give you a yes or no, but we're busy down there. And it seems to me as if the tempo picks up. Every year gets a little bit faster, and the wheel turns a little bit faster. And it sometimes seems as we don't accomplish nearly so much as we did a few years back. But do you realize that 70% of your action in a waking day is concerned with four following activities? 1, listening. Listening. 2, speaking. 3, reading. And 4, writing, in that order. Listening, speaking, reading, and writing. You think, 70% of my waking hours spent like that? Well, just think about it. I don't know, but I read quite a bit. I listen to quite a bit. I speak quite a bit. And you think about 70% of our waking hour time. Well, then how efficient should we become in our communication process? We should be very careful and very thorough and make sure that people understand us and so on. We can go back to the time of Aristotle, hundreds of years before Christ, and he said the main purpose of communication is persuasion. The main purpose of communication is persuasion. We've added a couple of corollaries to that over the years, including the information and entertainment. Information and entertainment added to persuasion. We as denomination probably think of communication more in persuasion than we do everything else, don't we? Because we're oriented in persuasion technique. We're oriented in the propaganda approach, aren't we? We're oriented to the point of view that we want to get people to do things and get people to act, get people to accept, and so on. So we're obviously oriented to that point of view, and have been for some years. It's a mistake to think that these three purposes of communication, persuasion, information, and entertainment, are separate, because they're not. They're all bound up in one. And the best communication is that communication that uses all of these to get ideas across, to entertain people, and to move them or persuade them to do something or to accept something. And so this whole thing must be wrapped up in one package, not just separate packages as far as purposes are concerned. Everything we do in communication should be directed toward purpose. We have a hard time in persuasion techniques, in sticking our purpose, particularly as Adventist, in really thinking in terms of the receiver of our communication. And this is our problem. Because we, in directing our purpose and thinking about the receiver, we do not think in his terms. We think in terms of the creator of the message, ourselves, the creator of the message, the one that is sending the message. We think more in our terms of the purposes than we think in the purposes in terms of the receiver. This is so true in such processes as fundraising. Have you ever thought about this? We want a building in our campus, for example, and here's what we want in our building, and here's how much money it takes, and here's what we're going to do with this building, and all of this. But we're going to communicate that purpose that we have in mind to the receiver, when actually we ought to be thinking in terms of what his money will do for him rather than for what his money will do for us. Ever thought about it? And it's that simple. And I'll come to this part of the communication process in just a moment, because it is a vital part of it. So keep in mind purpose. And the purpose is directed toward the receiver, not the person who's creating the message, not the person who's sending the message, but in terms of the person receiving the message. The reason most of our communication today is rather inefficient is because we've got into some habits, into some patterns, and a repetitional process that keeps us from being effective. You ever thought about this? In other words, in my office, for example, we turn out news release after news release after news release. And the pattern is the same. 1, 2, 3. See? And we don't think and sit down to think. And I believe we as Adventist leaders and public relations people and as communicators don't sit down to think and to, shall I say, innovate and create and become concerned with something just a little bit different in our approach, something just a little bit more, shall I say, innovative than what we've done in the past. And so habit gives us a sort of ineffectual and a really, many cases, a non-essential approach to our jobs. And this is too bad, because really this is done many times just to impress the people we work with, rather than done for the communication and purpose of the communication. Everything about a message, and everything about the sender of the message, and everything about the channel through which the message is sent should be thought of in terms of the receiver and the purpose of the message. And I'll come to just a few minutes into what I'm talking about in the communication process in pointing out the ones who receive the message should be thought about first rather than last. And therefore the research process that goes on is vital to the purpose of the message and to the message itself. And if it doesn't fulfill the purpose and go to the proper receiver, you might as well not even have the message. You following me on this now? I'm going to open this up for questions after about 20-25 minutes. The old model, I'm sure you know the old model of the communication process. You have I call it I suppose you'd call it the sender, and the encoder, and the message, and the channel, and the decoder, and the receiver. And this is the old model. This is the model of the communication process as it is, you might say, on a technical nature. In other words, as Elder Bradford was talking this morning, he was the sender, wasn't he? His voice, in this case, was the encoder, wasn't it? The air through which he spoke, and the room, and all of this was the channel, and then we decoded it with our ears and also with our eyes, did we not? The expression on his face. He got the feedback from us, didn't he? And we received it. It's just a simple process. This is elementary communications right now, but this is the model, the process of the model, you might say, or the model of the process that goes on in our thinking. And anywhere along this line, it can be interrupted. For example, let me give you an example of it. They were doing a survey among illiterate people in certain ghettos and certain tenement sections, and they were questioning them in a poll about should or should not the government subsidize profits? Should the government subsidize profits? And they got an overwhelming yes in one section of the ghetto. And come to find out, the people in the ghetto understood it to mean P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S. Subsidized profits. Because these people were oriented in this particular place to a church who had a prophet and whom they knew and whom they respected and whom they wanted to help. See? So they were for the subsidizing of P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, not P-R-O-F-I-T-S. You see the point? And the thing can be fouled up all along the line. Those of you who were in World War II remember the old term S-N-A-F-U, S-N-A-F-U. Situation normal, all fouled up. And that's the way it was many times in the Second World War. Situation normal, all fouled up. And there we got our term, and the word that was used widely at that time, snafu. Snafu. That's where we got the word. And this is a part of the communications process, and we'll get to the linguistic part of it in just a moment. Here's the model. Now, along with this, you have to have a stimulus for the sender, don't you? You have to have a stimulus for him. He has a purpose in mind, and he's ready to communicate that. And so he gets it down. He encodes it in some way, through radio, through written, through TV, whatever it might be. In other words, the channel down here is important, but he encodes it into this process, doesn't he? And these things go together. And therefore, by the way, written communication and published communication is a matter of record. On our campus, we worry more about the student newspaper than we do about the radio, because radio is so, well, it's just gone. I mean, it's just like that, and the thing's gone. And we will get far more reaction to printed media process than we ever get to the TV or radio process. And it's because it's so quick to go, isn't it? But you still have to be careful. Written communication you have to be far more careful on, in my estimation, you do spoken communication, because spoken communication really is so transient and so quick that you don't have to worry about it. Now, I'm violating some of the principles this morning of communication because I'm going so fast. And when this transcription comes out for a secretary to type, I feel for her, because she's not going to be able to get it all. Because I've always taught like this and acted like this, and it's awfully hard for an old dog to learn new habits. So, you got all the processes in here. You got a stimulus for the receiver. Now, as you go through here, you think of purpose. What are you going to do through here? What media are you going to use? What channel, and so on. And then the purpose that you want for the receiver. You want a stimulus for him. And also, as you stimulate him, you need a prospect in his mind of a reward. A prospect in his mind of a reward. Now, the reward may be in the satisfaction of learning something, mightn't it? It may in the satisfaction of doing something for him, a service in the message, entertainment in the message, and so on. Maybe you're persuading him about something. Maybe it's a fundraising drive. And so you say, he has to have some satisfaction from receiving this message from you. Now, if you give him this reward immediately, that he has received the message and accepted it and is ready to act, and he acts and you reward him, and then this happens each time, just a conditioned response, this happens each time, then he's going to make a habit out of doing this sort of thing. Now, by the way, I'm going too fast on this, and it sounds too manipulative as I give it. You see what I mean? It's too manipulative as I give it. But as an example, in our committee of 100 that we established at SMC to help us with our building program, we asked 100 men in the Southern Union to give $500 a year. We called them in. We told them all about the college. We had graphics. We had a sound film, multimedia production for them. We told them that this is your college. I'm simplifying all this now. This is your college. We want your help. What would you like to do to help? Then we let them take the initiative in thinking about what they could do to help us, and in making plans to help us, and then in helping us. We rewarded them with the satisfaction of seeing a job well done. They got a nice certificate from the college indicating in their office that they were a member of the Committee 100. They got a pin for the lapel. They were put on all the lists to receive the minutes of the Board of Trustees, to receive the publications of the college, to communicate with them on anything of matters of importance. They were also invited to sit in on the board meetings. Can you imagine? Sit in on the board meetings as advisors to the institution. We made these rewards just as quick and as valuable to them to reinforce the impression and the message that we'd try to get across to them. We still, although we haven't been soliciting heavily lately, we still have 87 members in the Committee of 100, and they have now paid for one building, and they have now bought and are operating, not operating, but they bought our shopping center so they would take the capital indebtedness of the shopping center off the college so the college could use that money in other building programs. So what I'm trying to point out is, don't delay the reward to the receiver. Make it just as quick and as emphatic and as complete as you can possibly make it. He is the one that you're working toward, aren't you? If you can give him any kind of recognition in any way. We have a program at the college of hometown releases. And we try to get these out as quick as we can early in the year to all of the hometowns of our students. And the bare fact, just the bare fact of recognition in a small weekly newspaper means so much to these people in these isolated places. Because this identifies them with the community. This is a form of recognition. This is a form of reward, isn't it? For the fact that they have sent their daughter off to college. She is amounting to something. She is somebody in the community. And this is tremendously important to people. Recognition, the reward. Now, language. Oh my, we could spend a long time on this. At the best, language is very poor for communication. And sometimes I think some of the comics, like Red Skelton, or Flip Wilson, or some of the others, can communicate better with their bodies than people can actually communicate with language. Simply because the expression on a person's face, the way he slouches, the way he falls, so many things are just carry the image right across to you, and we react quickly, don't we, to some things like this. Some of it's just completely ridiculous. Like Victor Borg, we had Victor Borg as a Lyceum Fine Arts series on our campus not long ago, and the fact that he was so intense playing that sonata, and he'd get up closer to the piano, and closer to the piano, and then he fell off the piano bench. Eh? Tremendous. I mean, he is superb in this sort of thing. And the communication was so clear because it was anticipated. He got his audience ready for what he's going to do, didn't he? And he was communicating the message, although he was playing the piano. And you'd think the way he was playing it, you'd think that was the outstanding thing. But the outstanding thing was that you knew shortly he was going to fall off the piano bench. Eh? This is crazy, isn't it? But it's true. So, semantics. And we can talk about a long time about semantics. In its just short, quick definition, semantics is a study of meaning. In fact, one authority wrote a book on it called The Meaning of Meaning. That's an interesting title, isn't it? The Meaning of Meaning. And I suppose we could do like, Gertrude Stein say, the meaning of meaning of meaning of meaning, couldn't we? Just go right on with it, see? The point I'm trying to make is that meaning to me is not necessarily meaning to you. Your whole background determines your interpretation of any given, particularly controversial word, like red. Some people see communist immediately, but a dress designer would see color. Isn't this true? A philosophical person might see something else in it, and so on. Politician, so on. But what is meaning? Now that's the clearest definition I suppose I could probably get, in a short one. But then when you go on in semantics, you get to a term that is used and made popular over the last 10, 12, 15 years called general semantics. And general semantics is an extension of semantics that has to do with the way you act and the way you live and the total communication you have other than just language. It has to do with survival. In other words, you look out the window and you say the grass is green. Well, the grass isn't necessarily green. It seems to be green to us as we look at it out the window. Up here it's a little bit darker than it is. It's a little browner than it is down south right now. Ours is a little greener maybe. And I should say ours seems to be a little greener than yours, shouldn't it? He seems to do this, or seems to be this, or seems to be that. Because the more you say something is something, it has to be. And using those being instead of being verbs, you're getting yourself in a corner that may be very difficult to get out of. The same thing with criticism. If we make dogmatic statements, as we do, as Adventists often do, dogmatic statements that we cannot back up on, that we cannot have any room to maneuver, or our receiver cannot have any room to maneuver, then we have questioned our survival as a communicator to him, and we have also questioned his survival as a receiver of what we have to say, haven't we? So there's no meeting in the minds. So general semantics has to do with the actual survival of us as living personalities, not a physical death by any means, but shall I say, a philosophical or a communicating death, if you want to put it that way, simply because there's no meaning in the minds. And so general semantics has to do with survival of us as individuals, survival of our country, survival of our church, doesn't it? And so dogmatism actually has no place. Dogmatism actually has no place in communication, particularly the farther apart the receiver and the sender are. Now, dogmatism can increase as they become of like minds. Isn't this true? Dogmatism can increase as you become of like minds. But the farther you are apart, the less dogmatism should prevail. And therefore it's hard to explain this to people when we say, we have the truth. See? And I'm not belittling this. Don't misunderstand me on this at all. When we say this, though, how much are we really communicating of our purpose to the receiver who knows nothing at all about what we believe? I think he'll just turn us off. I think our survival of what we believe and transferring our purpose and persuasion to him will be far less effective than it would be if we started at the place where we say something like this, that there are differences, there are misunderstandings, there are these things, but we have a common ground, see? And well, it's just like going to the Lions Club, isn't it? If you're a member of a service group and you're asked about what you believe, it's very easy to come up on the blind side rather than it is direct confrontation, isn't it? Isn't this true? And I think your influence will be far greater if you make a friend and then convince him than try to convince him and lose a potential friend. Maybe this is all wrong. Maybe my doctrine on this is not exactly true, but it appears to me to be this way. Now, I would change, therefore, just a little bit the golden rule, and I'm not presuming to change what is written, but I think it might be improved just a little bit to say to treat others as they would like to be treated. Not necessarily treat them as you would like to be treated. Because your ideas and your differences are so strange or foreign to other people that possibly our empathy should go as to how others would like to be treated rather than as we would like to have them treat us. So, let's go on to 1.2, research in all this communication process. And at this point, Gordon, would you hand out first the package on top and then the second package there? Would you get...
I don't know that, Gordon.
I mean, please.
You said the top package?
Right. Top package in the bottom. If someone would help him there, I'd appreciate it. You're going to get, I noticed from the program, you will have another speaker on polling techniques and so on, but I'm going to give you an example here that of a little project that we've been working on for 4 years, and I don't want you to, don't read it or anything right now. I just want to come to some conclusions in it in just a moment. Two expressions on the board, semantic differential and Q sort. And this is an example, this study right here, and we've been conducting it for 4 years now on attitudes and opinions of students at Southern Missionary College. And we've used the semantic differential and the Q sort. And quickly, let me give you the process of communication as far as public relations is concerned. First, you research, you get your facts, you get everything there is to know about the problem, about your message, about whatever you want to tell people. That's what you do first. And in this research, you identify your publics. You make sure that this is the people to whom your communication is going. See? This small group here. Anymore, let me warn you here. Anymore, when you put out information, it ought to be directed at a particular public, because people are not going to listen. People live in a cocoon. They have crawled into something and put something around them. They're just not going to listen. I feel so sorry for Mr. McGovern. Really, I do. People have just turned him off. And the more forceful and the more dramatic and the more, shall I say, his rhetoric zoomed and went this way and that way, the more people turned him off. And this is easy for a communicator to see, because it is the mark, it's almost the mark of desperation. And therefore you do feel very keenly about his not being able to communicate with people, especially in the last stages of the campaign. And his rhetoric got so terrible, such as terms as Hitler and so on, that really the people don't believe anymore. In other words, this is difficult. Now, you need to know what your public to whom you're about to communicate actually believe, what their opinions are. And you say, when we look at this paper in just a minute, you'll say, well, opinion is not the thing. Well, it's just like grass. Grass is not the word, is it? The word is not the thing. And the opinion is not the fact. But people act on the basis of opinions and attitudes, not on the basis of facts. Think about that for a minute. People act on the basis of opinions and attitudes and not on facts. We wish everybody was a rational, logical, reasonable human being. But unfortunately he isn't. And therefore, we start where he is in order to take him where we want him to be. Now the semantic differential is just a device that's been worked out. Over on the left in this you have a straight line. Over on this is an old-fashioned thing. Over here you have excellent. And over here, of course, you have poor. And we rate some individuals on the basis of where we think they come on this continuum, don't we? This is a semantic differential. This is how simple it is. Now, the Q sort that we've used in this research goes just a little bit farther. We took some statements about Southern Missionary College, and this is what we did. And this is for our student body only. No other student body. This is the public we wanted to reach. And we put statements about the college. I believe, the first statement, the pro, is I believe that Southern Missionary College has the highest spiritual standards of any other college in the denomination. That was the top. At the bottom we put, I believe that Southern Missionary College has the poorest spiritual standards of any college in, I believe, in North America. I don't remember. But those things are there. We put these on cards, 7 statements on cards, going from the most pro we could get to the most con we could get. You follow me? Then we mixed those cards up. And we had a series of these cards. We mixed those cards up, and then we took a random sampling of the student body. At 1,200, I believe, is in the first study there, we took every 20th one. And we didn't necessarily start with 1 and then go to 20, and then we say maybe start with 3, and so on. But we made absolutely sure that it was a random sample, and then we made also absolutely sure that everybody who was the 20th one responded. See? Now you say, well, that's not valid. You've got 1,200 students and you're only polling 60 of them. Well, if you get into the statistics involved in it, and with what we call the normal curve, you'll find out that this type of polling is far more effective than just taking one here because he has this much background economically, this much background spiritually, this much background socially, and so on, and then pick another from another strata and another from another strata. Actually, the random sample works much better and has been proved. By the way, I'm talking about now, I'm referring to studies made by Dr. William Stevenson of the University of Missouri, working for Dorsey Advertising, is one of the forerunners in this. In fact, he came up with some of the slogans that made Budweiser so popular over the last 20 years. And I hate to give credit to a man for that, but at least that's what his business was. And he had a Ph.D. in psychology, a Ph.D. in journalism, and a Ph.D. in mathematics. And he is the outstanding authority, I suppose, in the United States in this area. And he has been doing polling of all kinds. And so actually, when it comes right down to it, you can sometimes tell more about a cross-section of a particular public. I'm not talking about the great masses, of a particular public by a Q sort. All right, you take this Q sort, so you've got 60 people responding with, say, 4 or 5 questionnaires. So you've got 7 opinions, 7 cards, going from the thing they like most to the thing they like least, that you can put into the computer, and then you come up with an average, don't you, of all those 60. Now, let's turn, in that first study, let's turn to those averages. And the first one is by Mr. Sephardi, working under my direction. Turn to the statistical data on page 16. Student attitude by classes. Freshmen, and this the first one is on spiritual, 3.28. Now let me interpret just a little bit. A +4 is perfect. A -4 is completely imperfect. In other words, completely poor. So you end up, freshmen, 3.28. Very high response on the spiritual aspects of SMC. Sophomores, 3.70. Juniors, 3.71. And we had a perfect from the seniors. Now, if you'll turn back in the data, you'll find, however, that the random sample probably picked up about 1 short of a complete random sample. Now, let me show you how the random sample works. If you will turn back to page... Where is it on the distribution of the population? Yeah, on page 4 in Sephardi's. The general population was 1,270 or 100%. Research totaled 60 or 100%. Females 705 or 55.5%. Males 565 or 44%. In the general population, the percentages is 55 to 44, females and males. In our study, it came out 58 and 42. And that was a random sample. So we were only 2 percentage points off. Now, you'll hear a lot about polls right now, Gallup and Roper and Harris and Yankovic and all the rest of them. If they have a plus or minus 4%, they feel as if they're doing very well indeed. We had a plus or minus 2% just in comparison to the general population. You follow me? This points up the accuracy of even a small sample. Now, let's look back over here again. On the social, look at there, a minus 0.60. Nobody likes social regulations on an SDA campus. But look, the next year it was minus 0.49. Then next year it was a plus 0.10. And the next year it was a plus 0.16. Well, that's quite a step from a minus 0.60, isn't it? Let's go on to academic. 2.27, and then the sophomores dipped to 1.66. What does that tell us? Any ideas? They were disillusioned in their freshman year. And there is a place where we're going to have to study and where we're going to have to work, is this sophomore dip. Now, we've done this study for 4 years, and we find this is true each year. Unfortunately, this sophomore dip in this class has carried over completely into their senior year, too. They carried this reservation about, but there's still a plus 1.66, isn't it? Then it went back up to 3.12 and back up to 3.25 in the seniors. Tuition. And the study here, if you'll notice, the sophomore dip again, and then it went back up, but still a minus. War. Look at that. This is opposition 2. Opposition 2. And as the seniors, there was less opposition to the war in the seniors than there was among the sophomores. You see that? Integration. And on a southern campus, we wanted to know about this. Look at this. The freshmen were almost neutral. In other words, they had open minds on this. The prejudice exists in the minds of the parents and not in the minds of the students. This is what this tells us to some extent, isn't it? Then look, sophomores 1.16, a better attitude. Juniors 1.46, and seniors 1.79. Well, that, to me, is very significant, that they are being educated that they must live with their fellow man. Now, I'm not giving you this study to boast about SMC. I'm giving you this study to say these things are telling us something, because you know what's happened over the 4 years of this study, and I wish I had the other 2 years completed, but our programmer for our computer is, we're going commercial with the thing, and therefore all the commercial aspects have taken over from the academic. Therefore, I haven't been able to finish, but we have a 4-year study now, and you know what we found? And this is, I hate to report, is that morale is slowly deteriorating among our own students. And now I don't know that this can be extended to the campus of other institutions like ours, but we view it with some alarm, because there is an erosion of traditional values on the campus. There is an erosion of oneness with the institution. There is a sort of apathy that has set in, and we've been measuring it every year now, and we've been trying to ascertain completely through these studies just exactly what it is that we can do to improve the situation. And so these give some research ideas for you. You may keep these if you would like to have them. Let's go on quickly now. So you have your fact-finding, you have your research, you've identified your publics, all right, you plan. And this is the second step in your PR process and your communication process. You plan your program in such a way that you can utilize the maximum efficiency, the maximum, shall I say, potential of your institution. Then 3, you carry out your program. You put your program into effect. And what we try to do, and it's hard to do, we try to evaluate it as we go along. Some of it is off the top of our heads, some of it's research. Evaluate it as you go along. So, the thing makes a circle then, doesn't it? Thing makes a circle. Research, plan, execute, and then research again. Now, the best manufacturing companies in the world do it just like this. They're going to bring a new soap out on the market. They research that soap and they pre-test it in markets. A lot of pre-testing done in Atlanta, for example, because they say this is a typical market. Atlanta is a typical market because it's suburban, it's farming, it's business, and so on. They pre-test and research a product. May spend $1 million to manufacture a soap and pre-test it and put everything before it goes on sale nationally. And then they plan the campaign after they've done all the research. Then they carry out the advertising campaign. And immediately that they're carrying it out, they're researching it, aren't they? To see how effective it has been. And so the process goes on and on and on. That concludes my remarks. That's a fast 35 or 40 minutes course in communication. Now, questions?